The security guard's hand closed around his arm before he even had a chance to set down the clipboard. There were 500 people on that rooftop. 500 people in diamonds and dark suits, holding champagne glasses that cost more than most people's electric bills, laughing at things that were not funny in rooms where the laughter itself was a form of currency. The Chicago skyline burned behind them in the October dark, 40 stories above the street, and every surface gleamed because the Whitmore Foundation had spent $60,000 on lighting alone. It was that kind of night. The kind that made regular people feel like they had accidentally walked into a world that was never meant to include them. Cole Merritt had not walked in by accident. He had a work order, a hard hat clipped to his belt, and a 7-year-old daughter named Massey standing beside him in a yellow dress that she had chosen herself because she had been promised the party would be pretty and she wanted to match. She was holding his hand. She was looking at everything with the wide, cataloging eyes of a child encountering the world at its most excessive and finding it mostly interesting. There was a chocolate fountain near the far wall. She had noticed it immediately. Cole had not come for the party. He had been contracted 3 days ago by the building's property management company to inspect a reported microfracture in the rooftop terrace's load-bearing edge supports. It was a structural assessment, 1 hour's work at most, and he had cleared it with the event coordinator on Friday. His name was on the vendor access list. He had the email on his phone. All of this was completely beside the point, because none of it mattered at the moment the woman in the black dress turned from her conversation, looked at him, and decided in approximately 2 seconds what kind of man he was. Diana Ashwell had been running these events for 4 years, ever since Ashwell Capital became the Whitmore Foundation's headline corporate sponsor. She knew every face in this room. She knew every caterer, every florist, every AV technician, every member of the foundation's board, every donor at every table. She knew the faces of people who belonged here because she had personally approved every name on the guest list, and the man standing near the canapé station, in a canvas work jacket with the name of a contracting company printed across the left breast, was not on it. She crossed the room without hesitation. This was something people who worked with Diana would have recognized immediately. She did not approach situations, she resolved them, and there was no visible distance between the decision and the action. She was 34 years old, and she ran a firm that managed $900 million in active acquisitions, and she had not built that by second-guessing herself in the moment. She said to the nearest security guard, without preamble, "Remove him. People like him don't belong here." She did not lower her voice. 500 people did not all hear it, but enough did. The cluster nearest to them heard every word. A woman in a green gown pressed her lips together and looked away. A man with silver cufflinks let out a short sound that was not quite a laugh, but was related to one. The conversation around the canapé station went from 60 to 0 in the way conversations do when something happens that everyone will pretend not to have witnessed. The security guard moved. 2 of them, actually. The second one arriving with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this before and found it unremarkable. They took Cole by the arms and began walking him toward the elevator bank, not roughly, but with the absolute assurance of men who did not expect resistance. Cole did not resist. He looked back once, not at Diana, not at the room, but at Massey. She was standing where he had left her, 2 feet from the canapé table, in her yellow dress, her small face going from confused to something worse. She did not cry loudly. She did not make a scene. She was 7 years old and she had learned early, the way children of single parents sometimes do, that making a scene costs something. Her eyes filled up and spilled over silently, and she wiped her face with the back of her hand and followed her father and the security guards to the elevator because there was nothing else to do. Cole produced the work order in the elevator. He held it out to the guard on his left. The guard took it, looked at it, and said nothing. On the rooftop, Diana was handed the paper by the event coordinator, who had gone pale. She looked at it. She looked at the work order number, the service request date, the authorized vendor's signature. She handed it back. "Have him send the structural report by email," she said, and turned back to her guests. They were escorted from the building. Outside on the sidewalk, with the October cold coming off the lake and the noise of the city filling the space where the party had been, Cole crouched down in front of Macy. His knees hit the concrete. He was at her eye level, the way he always got when something needed to be said properly. Macy looked at him with her face still wet. "Are you poor daddy?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of a man who didn't know the answer, but the quiet of a man who was choosing his words the way you choose tools, carefully, for a specific purpose. "Not in any way that matters," he said. Macy thought about this. She was 7, but she was her mother's daughter, which meant she thought about things with a rigor that sometimes surprised adults. She said, "We don't belong," she said. She was wrong, Cole said. Some people mistake manners for class. They're not the same thing. He stood, took her hand, and walked her to his truck. He drove her to his mother's house, 2 miles away. He kissed her forehead at the door, and told her he'd be back before 9. Then he drove back and sat in his truck in the parking structure for 22 minutes, and wrote the structural report in his notes app, because the rooftop terrace had a critical flaw that could kill people and whatever else had happened that night. That was still true. He filed it the next morning. By Friday afternoon, the owner of the building had read it. Cole did not know that the owner of the building was himself. That required some explanation. 12 years ago, Cole Merritt had been a different kind of man, or rather the same man in a different configuration. He had graduated from the Naval Academy with a structural engineering degree, served 5 years designing prefabricated field installations for a division operating in places he still could not name in public, and separated as a lieutenant commander at 29. He had co-founded a structural engineering consultancy in Chicago with 2 partners from his postgraduate program at Northwestern. The firm, Merritt Caldwell Partners, had designed the structural systems for 11 commercial buildings across the Midwest in its first 3 years, 2 of which had been featured in architectural publications. Cole's specific contribution, a load distribution method for high-rise terrace construction that reduced material costs by roughly 18% without compromising safety margins, had been licensed by 2 other firms and was still being used in projects he had nothing to do with. He had been 31 when his wife, Rebecca, was diagnosed. Glioblastoma multiforme. Stage 4. The oncologist had used the word aggressive, and Cole had spent the drive home looking it up on his phone while Rebecca sat in the passenger seat, with her hands folded in her lap, and the kind of stillness that comes after the worst possible news has finally been delivered, and the body has stopped bracing for it. They had been married 4 years. Macy was 3 months old. Cole sold his partnership stake in the firm within 6 weeks. It was worth $1.4 million at that moment, which was more than he had ever expected to have, and not nearly as much as it needed to be. He put it all into a trust structured to cover medical costs and long-term care. Rebecca underwent 3 surgeries and 2 rounds of experimental treatment over 14 months. She came home between procedures and slept in the bedroom, with the window she had always liked, and Macy in a crib at the foot of the bed. And Cole rebuilt their kitchen during the nights he could not sleep, because doing something with his hands was the only thing that kept the fear from taking up all available space in his chest. Rebecca died on a Tuesday in March, at home, with Cole beside her. Cole did not return to corporate engineering. He did not look for a new partnership, or rebuild the firm or leverage the professional contacts that still called him periodically to ask if he was ready to come back. He started a small renovation contracting business. He took jobs that required his actual skills, structural assessments, load calculations, renovation oversight for buildings that needed someone who understood what they were looking at, and he charged fair rates, and did good work, and was home every night to make dinner and read to Macy and put her to bed. The building trust had been established by his former partner, David Caldwell, as part of the buyout arrangement. Cole had signed papers giving David authority to invest a portion of the proceeds in real estate assets under the R. Merritt Holdings, LLC, structure, primarily for tax and estate planning purposes. Cole reviewed the trust statements quarterly, the way a responsible person reviews things without necessarily engaging with their full implications. He knew the portfolio included several commercial properties. He had not, until he drove to the Whitmore Foundation event and looked at the building address on his work order, connected the name of the property management company to the trust. He connected it on Friday morning, when his attorney called to discuss the structural report. Cole sat in his truck in front of Massey's school, waiting for the bell, and listened to his attorney explain that Merritt Holdings was the sole beneficial owner of the property in question, that the structural emergency created both a legal obligation and a significant leverage position, and that the building's largest commercial tenant, Ashwell Capital, which leased 3 full floors, and had done so for 6 years, was mid-transaction on a large acquisition, and could not relocate without catastrophic disruption to their deal timeline. Cole said, "Book the emergency repairs. I'll run it myself." There was a pause on the other end of the line. His attorney said, "You're aware that means you'll be on site at the same location as..." "Book it." He was aware that this was either the worst idea he had ever had or something else entirely, and he was not yet certain which. He showed up at Ashwell Capital's building Monday morning at 7:15, with his crew of 4, a materials manifest, and a revised structural timeline indicating that 8 weeks of active renovation work was required on the terrace support structure. The building's property manager had notified Diana on Friday afternoon. She had, according to the property manager, been very calm about it, which the property manager said in a tone suggesting this was not a good sign. Cole introduced himself to the front desk. The receptionist looked at his name, looked at her screen, and picked up the phone. He waited. She put it down. "Ms. Ashwell will be out in a moment," she said. Diana came out of the elevator 2 minutes later. She was in a charcoal blazer and heels, her dark hair back, her expression the expression of a woman who had decided what the outcome of this conversation was going to be before she walked into it. She looked at Cole. Something moved across her face, not recognition exactly, but the particular discomfort of a person encountering a situation that does not fit the category they assigned it to. He held out his hand. "Cole Merritt. We met briefly last week." Diana did not take his hand immediately. "You're the contractor. I'm the structural engineer running the renovation. I also hold the contracting license, yes." She studied him for a moment. Then she shook his hand, briefly, and said, "My people will show you the access points. I need a daily briefing at 8 a.m., and I need your crew off the main floor between 9 and 6. "That works," Cole said. "I'll need one exception. The terrace access is through your west conference room. My crew will need that corridor from 7 to 9 daily for materials transport." Diana said, "Fine." She was already walking back to the elevator. Cole watched her go. He thought about Massey's face in the elevator, the tears she had wiped away with the back of her hand without making a sound. He picked up his clipboard and went to find the load-bearing walls. It was 3 weeks into the renovation when the school called at 7:43 on a Thursday morning to report a teacher workday that had not been on the calendar. Cole had. His regular sitter had a family obligation. His mother was in Milwaukee visiting his aunt. He looked at the call schedule, looked at the critical phase of terrace support work that could not be unsupervised, and called Massey. "Can you be good at a work site for a few hours?" he asked. "I'm always good," she said, with the patience of a child who has been underestimated before. He brought her in at 8, set her up at the small table in the corner of the work floor with her sketchbook and a thermos of warm apple juice and 3 of her good drawing pencils, and told her that under no circumstances was she to touch anything red, anything metal, or anything that said caution on it. She said, "Okay, Daddy," and opened her sketchbook. Diana arrived at 8:45. One of the mornings she came in early, rather than the usual 9, moving fast through the main floor toward her office with her phone to her ear, and her attention elsewhere. She pushed open the door to the work area, which Cole's crew had been using as a secondary staging point, and stopped. Massey looked up. "Who are you?" Diana asked. "Massey," said Massey. "I'm Mr. Cole's daughter. It's a teacher workday. Who are you?" Diana looked at the child sitting at the corner table with a drawing pencil and a sketchbook, in the middle of what was nominally her conference floor, and said, "This is a work environment. It is not a daycare." "Now we're sorry, Mikaino. Alora Fiji." Before Cole, who was 14 feet away reviewing the load calculation, could cross the distance, Massey tilted her head and asked, with the perfect, weaponized sincerity of a 7-year-old who had thought of nothing else, "Are you the lady who made my daddy walk through all the people?" The floor went very quiet. Jess, Diana's assistant, who had been at her standing desk 3 workstations over, stopped typing. 2 members of Cole's crew near the far wall developed a sudden intense interest in the floor joists. The open-plan space, which had perhaps 20 people in various corners of it, did not turn to look. Everyone simply stopped moving. "He said you just didn't know better," Massey continued. "Is that true?" Cole had reached his daughter. He put his hand on her shoulder, gently, the way you redirect a force of nature without fighting it. He looked at Diana. Diana was looking at Macy with an expression that had no category name Cole could find. Not anger, not guilt exactly, something rawer than either. She opened her mouth and closed it. "Macy," Cole said quietly. "Back to your drawing, please." Macy looked up at him, nodded seriously, turned back to her sketchbook. Diana walked to her office. Through the glass wall, Cole could see her sit down and not pick up her phone for a long time. Jess brought her a coffee she hadn't asked for, and set it on the desk without a word. Cole looked at Macy, who was drawing with focused calm. "You said that on purpose," he told her. "I just asked a question," she said, without looking up. "Uh-huh," he said, and went back to his load calculations. That evening, Jess stayed late at her desk cross-referencing the renovation contract against the building's property registry. She was thorough by nature, and the discrepancy had been bothering her for 2 days. The vendor agreement was routed through a property management company, but the beneficial ownership trail ended at a trust designation she couldn't find a public filing for. She ran the LLC name through the state business registry. Our Merritt Holdings. Registered 17 years ago. Trust documents sealed. Single trustee. No press, no profile, no digital footprint whatsoever. Cole Merritt. She sat back in her chair and stared at her screen for a long time. Then she closed the browser, opened a new document, and wrote 6 words at the top. "The things Diana needs to know immediately." She thought about it. She deleted it. She thought about it more. She opened it again. She was still thinking about it when Diana walked past at 7:40, coat on, already on her phone. Jess put her laptop in her bag. Tomorrow, she thought. She would tell her tomorrow. And she would tell her carefully, because she had worked for Diana Ashwell for 4 years. And she understood that Diana received information the way most people received blows, absorbing it completely, showing nothing, and processing in private. The delivery mattered. The days of the renovation acquired a rhythm that neither Cole nor Diana had anticipated, and neither would have admitted to finding useful. Cole was on site by 7. Diana was in by 8:45 on 3 days out of 5, and by 8 on the other 2, because she was the kind of person who used early mornings the way other people used offices, as the cleanest, most protected time in the day. They crossed paths in the corridor near the West Conference Room reliably at 9:15, which was when Cole's crew transitioned from materials prep to active structural work, and when Diana was on her 3rd email of the morning and moving at the speed of a woman who had decided everything around her should simply keep up. He made her coffee the first time because the machine on the work floor made better coffee than the one in the kitchen, which everyone who used the kitchen already knew but no one had bothered to fix. He handed her a cup without being asked. She looked at it, looked at him, said nothing, took it. That was Thursday. On Friday, she said, "The left button on that machine is set wrong. It's pulling too long." On Monday he had adjusted the grind setting. She tried it. Did not comment. Took the cup to her office. Jess watched this exchange from her standing desk with the expression of someone watching a chess game and understanding that neither player had acknowledged they were playing. Macy came on Fridays because Fridays were Cole's half-day with his crew, and he picked Macy up at noon and brought her to the site while he did afternoon admin. She had, by the second Friday, discovered that the corner of Diana's outer office had a view of the street below that included a hot pretzel cart, a dog walker who brought 8 dogs simultaneously, and occasionally a man who played saxophone with his eyes closed. She reported on all of these to Jess in detail. Jess encouraged this. On the 3rd Friday, Massey left a drawing on Diana's desk, a picture of the pretzel cart with a surprisingly accurate rendering of the dog walker and all 8 dogs. Diana did not throw it away. Cole noticed, on a morning when he came into Diana's office to review a terrace diagram, that there were now 3 of Massey's drawings pinned above her desk. Diana did not mention them. Cole did not mention them. He rolled out the diagram, walked her through the revised support calculations, and left. That evening, he sat on his back porch while Massey slept, and thought about a woman who kept a child's drawings, and wouldn't say so, and a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and couldn't remember the last time she'd sat still. And a rooftop where something had happened that he still wasn't sure what to call. He thought about Rebecca, the way he always did in the evening, not with the consuming grief of the early years, but with the settled, permanent love of a man who has accepted that carrying someone with you is not the same as being held in place by them. Rebecca would have had an opinion about all of this. She would have shared it without being asked. He almost smiled at the thought. He went inside. He checked on Massey, straightened her blanket, turned off the lamp she had left on. He was back at the site by 7 the next morning. Preston Ashwell arrived on a Tuesday. Cole saw him first, which was perhaps fortunate. He was coming out of the service corridor with the materials review on his clipboard, when the elevator opened, and a man walked out who wore his suit the way certain men wear authority, as though it were a natural physical characteristic rather than a choice. He was 40, broad-shouldered, the kind of conventionally handsome that photographs well. He was looking at his phone and smiling at something on it, and he had the particular ease of a person who has never spent serious time wondering whether he belonged somewhere. Jess, who was at the front desk for the morning coverage rotation, looked up and went very still. "Preston," she said. "Not a greeting? A warning." Preston smiled at her. "Jess, you look like you've seen a ghost." He looked around the work floor, at the renovation equipment, at Cole's crew, at Cole himself. "Is Diana in?" "She's in a call," Jess said. "She'll be." Diana's office door opened. She stood in the doorway and looked at her ex-husband, and her face did the thing Cole had begun to recognize. That absolute engineered stillness that was not calm, but was something Diana Ashwell had decided looked like calm. So it was. "Preston," she said. "I didn't know you were in Chicago." "Got in last night," he said. "I wanted to see you before the board meeting. Can we talk? My 8 o'clock just moved. Come in." She closed the door. Through the glass wall, Cole watched Preston sit in a chair across from Diana's desk with the comfort of a man who had sat there many times. He watched Diana's expression not change at all. He went back to his clipboard. Jess appeared beside him 3 minutes later. She said very quietly, without looking at him, "His name is Preston Ashwell. Ex-husband. 22% shareholder. He's been in London for 18 months and he came back because of the acquisition." Cole looked at her. She looked at his clipboard. "I thought you should know," she said, and went back to her desk. Cole thought about the 6 weeks of proximity, about the drawings above the desk, about the coffee machine and the 915 corridor intersections, and about a man with 22% of shares and reasons of his own, who had just walked back into a situation that was already more complicated than it needed to be. He wrote a note in his clipboard margins that said simply, "A call David." His attorney's name was David. He circled it twice. He called David that evening. David confirmed what Cole already suspected. The acquisition being managed by Ashwell Capital involved a target company whose largest physical asset, a mixed-use commercial tower on the north side, had been quietly assembled over the past 3 years into a holding structure adjacent to our Merritt Holdings portfolio. The deal, if it closed, would create an intersection between Cole's trust and Ashwell Capital's balance sheet that required disclosure. The attorney said, "You need to decide how you want to handle this. The undisclosed position becomes a problem the longer it stays undisclosed." Cole said, "How long do I have, realistically?" 2 weeks. Cole said, "Get the paperwork ready." What Cole did not know, and would not know for 5 more days, was that Preston Ashwell had begun working the board within 48 hours of his arrival. He was a skilled operator. That was not in question. He had co-founded Ashwell Capital with Diana at 26, structured the first 3 major acquisitions personally, and held his 22% through a shareholder agreement that gave him observation rights and limited blocking authority on transactions above a certain threshold. He had spent 18 months in London cultivating relationships with the 3 European institutional investors, who had bought into Ashwell Capital's most recent fund. He had also, during that time, built a quiet coalition of board members who believed Diana's singular control of the company was a governance risk. He was not wrong about everything. That was what made him dangerous. The narrative he brought to the board was surgical. He had screenshots of internal communications. Cole had later established that Preston had retained a contact inside the firm's IT that showed Diana's assistant Jess flagging the renovation contract for internal review, and Diana approving it without the standard 3-bid process. This was technically accurate. The emergency nature of the structural repair had justified the expedited approval under the firm's own protocols. But protocols require context to be understood, and Preston had stripped the context with the care of a man who knows exactly what he is doing. He added one more element. He told 2 board members, privately, over dinner, with the relaxed candor of a concerned former partner, that Diana had developed a personal relationship with the contractor. He said it with the generosity of a man reluctant to bring it up. He said he'd noticed it himself, and hadn't wanted to say anything but felt obligated given the fiduciary stakes. The board meeting was called for Thursday. Cole found out about it from Jess on Wednesday afternoon. She came to where he was working in the terrace access corridor and said, "There's a board meeting tomorrow at 2. Preston presented evidence of an improper contract award. He's calling for an independent audit." She paused. "He also told them it's personal, between you and Diana." Cole set down his level. "Is it recorded? The meeting? All board meetings are recorded per the shareholder agreement. Is Diana aware of what he's claiming? She found out an hour ago. She's in her office. She hasn't come out." Cole looked toward the glass wall. Diana was at her desk, not moving, staring at something in front of her that he could not see from this angle. Her face was the face of a woman who has been preparing for a battle and has just been told the rules of the battle were changed without her knowledge. He wanted to go in. He did not go in. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because he understood, with a clarity that came from watching Rebecca face impossible things with the particular dignity of someone who has decided their response matters more than the situation. That there were moments when the most respectful thing you could do for a person was believe in their capacity to handle it without your intervention. He went home. He called David. He said, "Move it up. Tomorrow morning." The morning of the board meeting, Cole arrived at the building at 6:50. He was wearing a suit. Not a new suit. It fit him like something he had worn before, which he had at 3 separate corporate closings in his previous professional life. It was charcoal gray, well-cut, slightly conservative, and it made no concessions whatsoever to the idea that he was a man who needed to announce himself. David was waiting in the lobby with 2 associates from the firm. They had a binder. Cole had reviewed it the night before, after Massey was asleep, sitting at the kitchen table under the lamp, reading every page. Preston arrived at 8 with his attorney, and a banker from his European firm, and a freelance photographer from a financial press outlet he had called yesterday afternoon. This last detail was deliberate. Preston understood that the story of a CEO ousted for impropriety was worth more with visuals. The photographer was still getting his equipment set up when Cole crossed the lobby. Preston saw him and registered him as the contractor, the man in the work jacket, a presence to be managed and dismissed. Then he took in the suit, the attorneys, the binder, and the expression on David's face, and he stopped. Cole said, "Preston Ashwell?" "That's right," Preston said, with the trained wariness of a man who has been in enough rooms to know when a room has changed. Cole said, "Cole Merritt, sole trustee of R.E. Merritt Holdings, which holds the fee title to this building, and, as of 7:45 this morning, a disclosed 17% stake in Ashwell Capital's Class B shares, acquired through the Whitmore Foundation Endowment Fund over the past 3 years." Preston's attorney went still. Cole continued, "Your proxy agreements for today's vote have a problem. 3 of your signatory shareholders, DKV Capital Partners, Lennox Group, and the Whitmore Foundation itself, had undisclosed material relationships with R. Merritt Holdings portfolio companies at the time of signing. Under the shareholder agreement's conflict of interest disclosure requirements, those proxies are void." David placed the binder on the lobby reception desk and opened it. "The challenge was filed with the corporate registrar at 7:45 this morning," he said. You're welcome to review. The lobby was filling up now. Employees arriving for the day, moving through the turnstiles, some slowing as they registered the cluster of suits and the tension that was visibly present between them. Board members were arriving, looking at Cole, and looking at Preston, and looking at the binder with the careful attention of people who understand that what they are witnessing is the point at which situations become permanent. The photographer was still taking pictures. He had not stopped. He would later say, when asked about it, that he had come expecting one story and gotten a completely different one, and that the second story was better. Preston looked at Cole for a long moment. His jaw was set. The practiced ease was gone. In its place was something smaller and more honest, the expression of a man who has played out his best hand and found the table already cleared. He said, and he said it loudly, because even in losing certain men cannot stop performing, "You're a contractor. You came in here to fix pipes. Don't stand here and pretend you belong in this room." The lobby went completely quiet. Cole did not respond immediately. He looked at Preston the way he looked at structural problems, with the calm, analytical attention of someone who has all the information they need and is simply deciding on the most efficient resolution. Then he turned, slightly, so that he was addressing not Preston alone, but the room. He said, 12 years ago, I designed the structural load system for 3 commercial buildings in this city. They're still standing. One of them is 4 blocks from here. He paused. Then my wife got sick. I sold my stake in the engineering firm I co-founded, at a significant loss, deliberately, because I needed the liquidity, and I spent the next 14 months making sure she was not afraid and not alone. Another pause. When she died, I had a 3-year-old daughter and a skill set, and a decision to make about what kind of life I was going to build next. I built a smaller one, a more honest one. He looked at Preston steadily. I didn't stop belonging in rooms. I just stopped needing to prove it to anyone. The lobby held that silence the way a room holds the moment after something breaks, suspended, complete, already irreversible. The photographer had lowered his camera. Preston's attorney was on his phone, speaking quietly, facing the wall. Preston said nothing. He looked at Cole for one more moment, and then he looked at his attorney, and something passed between them. He picked up his bag. He walked to the elevator. He pressed the button, waited, got in, and the doors closed behind him without a word. The board convened at 2 o'clock. The 3 voided proxies reduced Preston's effective voting block below the threshold required for a no-confidence motion. The vote to retain Diana as CEO was 17-3. The audit motion was tabled pending investigation into the origins of the original contract documentation, which David had separately flagged as having been obtained without authorization. Diana spoke for 11 minutes. She presented the emergency structural timeline that justified the expedited contract approval. She presented the renovation safety documentation. She did not mention Cole by name. She did not mention the rooftop gala. She was precise, thorough, and entirely unmoved by the room's attention, which was the only way Diana Ashwell knew how to be in a boardroom, and which, on this particular afternoon, looked exactly like what it was, a woman who had spent a very long time preparing for the possibility that the people she trusted would not hold. She came out of the board meeting at 4:15 and walked through the main floor and stopped when she saw Missy. Cole had run out of alternatives. The board meeting had extended past his childcare window, and he had Massey with him on the work floor, where she was sitting on the lobby couch with Jess, who was reading her something from her phone. Maichi was holding a piece of paper, a drawing she had been working on for most of the afternoon, in the patient, focused way she brought to things that mattered to her. Diana stopped in front of the couch. She looked tired in a way that only showed in small places, the set of her mouth, the slight looseness in her shoulders that was not relaxation, but its opposite. Macy held up the drawing. It was 2 people standing in front of a tall building, drawn in pencil with color pencil accents, the building rendered with surprising architectural accuracy for a 7-year-old who had spent 8 weeks watching her father measure walls. 2 figures, one tall with a construction hat suggested by 2 quick curved lines, one in a blazer with dark hair suggested by careful cross-hatching. Between them, a smaller figure with yellow hair holding both their hands. "I drew it for you," Massey said. Because you looked sad yesterday and my mom used to say drawing was for when you couldn't find the right words. Diana looked at the drawing for a long time. Then she took it from Maki's outstretched hand with both of hers, the way you take something fragile. She said very quietly, "Thank you, Masi." She took it to her office. She set it on her desk. Then she sat down and did not pick up her phone for a long time. 3 weeks later, the renovation was complete. The terrace was structurally sound, its load-bearing supports rebuilt to a specification that would outlast the building's projected lifespan by 30 years. The acquisition closed on the 22nd of the month, $912 million, the largest transaction in Ashwell Capital's 12-year history. Preston's resignation from the board was submitted without comment 9 days after the meeting. The independent audit into the proxy documentation was ongoing. On the last day of the renovation, Cole's crew packed their equipment out through the West Conference Room corridor in the morning. By noon, the floor looked like it had before they arrived, which was the point of good renovation work, that when it was done, you could not tell it had been needed. Cole was the last one out. He stood in the empty corridor for a moment, with his toolbox and his clipboard, and the particular feeling that comes at the end of something that was more than the job description indicated. Diana came out of her office. She was holding something. Maki's drawing, framed now in a simple black frame, the kind of frame that said, "This is on the wall permanently. This is not a temporary arrangement." She looked at him. "You could have told me who you were," she said. "The first day. You could have walked in here and said the name of the trust, and I would have known, and everything would have been different." Cole looked at her. "I didn't want everything to be different," he said. "I wanted to see who you actually were." Without the context. Diana was quiet. "You kept every drawing," he said. She looked at the frame in her hands. She looked at him. She did not answer that directly, which was its own kind of answer. Instead, she said, "Maki's birthday is Saturday." She mentioned the aquarium. A pause. "I've never been to an aquarium." Cole picked up his toolbox. "It's better than you'd think," he said. He walked toward the elevator. He pressed the button. The doors opened. Diana fell into step beside him. Not behind him, following. Not in front, leading. Beside at the same pace, the way two people walk when they have decided, without discussing it, to go in the same direction. The elevator doors closed behind them. From down the hall, Jess sat at her desk and watched through the open office doorway. The frame drawing was no longer on Diana's desk. It was on the wall now, properly hung, above the small credenza where Diana kept the 2 or 3 things that had nothing to do with the company and everything to do with her. 3 figures. 1 tall building. A small girl holding both their hands. Jess picked up her coffee. She had been meaning to tell Diana something important for approximately 7 weeks, and she had not found the right moment. But looking at that drawing on the wall, she thought that perhaps the important thing had already been handled without her. She went back to work. Outside, through the glass, Chicago moved in the ordinary, enormous way that cities do, indifferent to the small, specific weight of things beginning.